Jake's not in yet.
So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for coming out on this cold and dark winter evening, especially when some people are so concerned about large gatherings and avoiding them. It's really good to know that you've made it here tonight. I am Tim Bale, and I am the co-director with Rob Saunders here of the Mile End Institute. And this constitutes just one of a series of events that we put on over the academic year. You can find out more about what we do, if you haven't already, by going on our website. We have got some excellent events coming up. We have got one on for example, the 25th of March on the Labour Party and Brexit, which has been obviously a fairly conflictual and difficult relationship over the last few years. If you're interested in that, do come along. I am also the Deputy Director of the co-sponsor for the event tonight, the think tank UK in a Changing Europe, and you will see one of our publications there on the desk in front of you. If that interests you, do take it away. If you want to take an extra copy for a friend, if you are that strange, by all means do so. Again, you can go on our website to find out about the events and the publications that we do as an ESRC-sponsored initiative. Our job really is to bring academic research to the attention of a wider public and bring some, if you like, expertise, I know that's a dirty word to some people, to the party. So if you are interested in the UK-EU relationship going forward, as they say, please do sign up to our website and keep an eye on what we're doing. We have an event, for example, on the 10th of March on Brexit and Parliament, and if there are still seats for that in the QE2 Centre just by Parliament, and you have Tuesday free, please do come along to that. Anyway, without more ado, I would like to introduce you to our guest, Gawain Towler, and Rob will probably say a little bit more about Gawain, or you will hear a lot more about Gawain from Rob, and my co-director, Rob Saunders. So, Rob, Gawain, take it away.
Thank you. Well, thank you very much, and thank you all for coming this evening. We are delighted to have Gawain Towler with us this evening. He was head of press for UKIP for many years, and then director of communications for the Brexit Party. And I want to start with a profile that was published by Mark Wallace in 2015, in which he said, "The unsung hero of UKIP's rise to prominence, Towler has been instrumental in establishing Farage's voice, tone and fame. Unconventional in his love of waistcoats and cravats, Towler has become a rare stable fixture in a party notorious for its bouts of infighting. He knows the heart, guts and skeletons of the movement." So he's very well placed to give us an insider view this evening of the long march to Brexit. And what we're going to do is we're going to talk through some of the key moments on that march, and then we'll open it up to questions from the audience. So I'd like to start all the way back in 2001. You were standing in the general election that year.
I was.
For the Conservative Party.
In Glasgow Maryhill, that famous Tory area.
Absolutely. And I think you were also working for the Conservative Party in the European Parliament at that point in time. So what made you jump from the Conservative Party to this very new, very precarious outfit, UKIP?
I'd gone to Brussels in '99 after the European elections. I'd worked for a Conservative MEP, Nurj Diva, and that was, of course, the first direct PR election. And I was offered the job in London or the job in Brussels. And having been a sort of gut Eurosceptic at that point, but a soft one, I believe Britain run in Europe, not run by Europe at that point. But I felt that rather than throwing ordure at the institutions with a complete lack of information, I thought it'd be better to go to Brussels and find out. So in '99 I arrived there. I was the humanitarian aid and international development advisor. There was a book amongst the parliamentary assistants that I would be the first to go native. That didn't quite happen. But having spent about a year and a half, 2 years working on the desk in the European Parliament, I came to the conclusion that with the best will in the world, I could no longer honestly say that one can be in Europe and not run by Europe. If you're in Europe, you are run by Europe. And what I saw particularly was a clash between a common law system and the continental Napoleonic Code system. And we were always, there may have been votes at council, but we were always outvoted, time after time after time. Something that mattered to us as a nation was outvoted. And so I felt on balance, there were things about Europe, the EU, that I had no real problem with, but on balance, it seemed to me that our options were in completely Euro, the whole shebang, or out. This halfway house was damaging to the UK and damaging to the ambitions of our friends on the continent.
So what made you feel that that was a battle that you couldn't fight within the Conservative Party, given that you had Ian Duncan Smith coming in as leader?
I wrote a paper for the Centre for Policy Studies, and Ian Duncan Smith got very angry about it. I was instrumental in trying to get the Tories to leave the EPP, and the paper I wrote was about that, moving out of the EPP into their independent group. But I came to the conclusion the best thing to do was to laugh, because frankly, sensible, reasonable arguments were getting us nowhere. So I set up a magazine called The Sprout, which was a sort of private eye monkey in Brussels. I left an envelope on Jonathan Evans, who was the leader of the Tory group at that point, a brilliant but very pro-European chap, with my resignation letter, and said, I'm going to doing this, I don't want to have to leave, but if I upset you, you've got the resignation. Half an hour after my magazine hit the newsstands, he phoned me up. Gawain, I think I've been rude about Charles Tannock. It's not hard. So I then did that. I did that for a couple of years, and Farage came up to me in the pub one day, a couple of years later, and asked me three questions, statements more. You're a journalist, you're a Eurosceptic, you take the mick. And I said, yes. And he offered me a job working as the head of press for the political group in the European Parliament, which was about 3 times what I was earning as a freelancer. It took me less than half an inch of a pint to say yes.
And was that about 2004?
That was 2004.
Right. I mean, 2004 was a very significant year for UKIP, wasn't it?
It was about a month and a half after Kilroy Silk had self-immolated.
Right.
Basically. They'd done well in the Euros, but Kilroy Silk blew himself up. You had Richard North had just been sacked, so they were lacking in bottom. And
so
I was brought in.
Background, for anyone who hasn't followed UKIP closely,
yeah, precisely, like
years.
nobody.
I mean, 2004, you had your first real electoral breakthrough. You'd won 2.6 million votes in the European elections, 12 seats. You had this charismatic new figure, Robert Kilroy Silk, and then within 12 months, he had gone. The party had crashed in the 2005 election.
It took him April, May, July, 5 months to decide that he should be the leader of the party. And when he was told that doesn't quite work like that, he set up Vanitas.
Veritas.
Sorry.
Was there ever a moment at that point where you thought, I've made a terrible mistake, that this simply isn't going to
Pretty
work?
much everybody I knew at the time said, you'll never work again. Not in, you'll never work again in this town, you'll never work again, period. And to be honest, post the 2016 referendum, I don't think I've made a single sift for any job since then. The bias against, and obviously UKIP did have a toxic aspect to it, but the bias against Euroscepticism in corporate Britain and over there made it very difficult. So they weren't wrong.
So you were head of press.
Yeah. But as I say, it was for the group. So you had, at that point, you had the Lega Nord every now and then. We sacked them every now and then. They came back and we sacked them again. You had French, you had Dutch, you had Czech, you had Swedes, Danes. There's a broad range of reformist. And UKIP were the only withdrawers in that group. The rest were more reformists.
Right.
They were anti having the constitution, they were anti the euro, but they didn't want to leave.
So in terms of your relationship with the press, it's notoriously difficult for small parties to get a press hearing. What was your strategy for trying to publicise the movement?
Tears. Mostly. In the first few years, it was absurd. You would work a month to get 2 sentences in one national media. The local BBC would carry the conference, and that was it. Nobody else would turn up. They have to by law, so therefore they had to turn up because we had a certain percentage of the vote in the Euros. But other than them, nobody would turn up at all. You might find this odd, but I was really excited when James Tellingboyle turned up because he was a journalist. So it was very difficult. And it got to the point, and you just had to work, you had to do things. And it got to the point in Brussels where one of our people would do something, I would package it, send it across to the UK press in the Brussels lobby correspondence. They would send it to their editor, and the next day I would see my quotes from Farage or Roger Natman or whoever it was with a backbench Tory MP's name on them. Because the article would get to London, the editor would say, we don't like this UKIP lot, but we like the story, and they would whack somebody else, they'd phone up some motor-mouth backbencher, and they'd get, would you say this? Yes, I'll say that. Whack his name on it. And it got to the point where the amount of times, as I say, I phoned up and said, oi! All Brussels' attitude, however, was, in the great scheme of things, I don't really care if UKIP's name on it. Each one of these stories was changing the mood in the UK, was educating people to some of the stuff that was going on over there. So it didn't matter if UKIP's name on it, or the Tories' name on it, or whoever's name on it, because the argument was being made.
Did it create a pressure to be outrageous? Or to
Not initially. Not initially. We were quite ploddy initially. There was people won't believe this with Nigel's famous not turning up at the fishing committee 18 times in a row after one election. But he was very conscientious. They were all very conscientious. They did committees. They studied the reports. They didn't write reports, but they studied the reports. They went to the committee. They asked the right question. But nobody gave a hoot. Nobody gave a hoot. So obviously the crux moment was when Herman van Rompuy was made Commission President, and Nigel lost it. Who are you? Nobody's ever heard of you. I've never heard of you. The charisma of a damp rag and an appearance of a low-grade bank clerk. Suddenly, the press were interested. The video went viral. Dum-da-dum-da-dum, everything kicked off, and they were interested in what he had to say. Of course, they then complained about the fact he was rude. And you sort of talk to a journalist and say, you can't ignore everything he's done for 10 years, when it's been serious and grown up. He kicks off once, you report it broadly, and then say, why was he rude? The media made that. It was the media who, if to get them to talk about what we were doing, about how we were acting, and what we were trying to achieve, required Farage to do one of his speeches and be a little bit off colour and be a bit rude and be a bit in your face, well, the lesson from the media was, that's the way to get media.
So you're responding to a particular set of sort of news values?
Well, the news values were, you're boring, and we don't agree with you.
Right.
We think you're wrong, and we don't, and you're boring. You're not interesting. You've got to remember, back then, 2004, 5, 6, nobody cared. There were times, and I kid you not, there were people, particularly civil servants. You've got the move to Strasbourg, and there were people who had families in both towns. The behaviour of MEPs in the Strasbourg sessions was legendary. There was a bar called Les Aviateurs, where the extraordinary carries on. People who are quite famous both in this country now and in other countries, so who've gone on to be prime ministers and things of this sort, behaving outrageously, but nobody cared. And so therefore they could get up to with whatever they wanted. And it was great fun. However, more stuff was going on over there. I mean, I remember there was one Tory woman called Caroline Jackson, and she was the chairman of the Environmental Affairs Committee in the European Parliament. This was during the Blair years. She was the most powerful British Conservative. Nobody in the Tory party knew her name because she was controlling the most powerful European Parliamentary Committee, which was aggregating more and more power to itself because environmental issues was a European competence. So if Europe wanted to do something about fisheries, they would put an environmental attachment to it and therefore make it a European competence. So areas that weren't, although fisheries was always a European competence, but international trade and aspects of this sort, you'd always see this very greedy committee bringing more and more power to itself, because that would mean that the European institutions could legislate on an area that actually was outside their remit. But nobody had heard her name.
When you say that the press weren't interested, though, I mean, clearly
They
not
weren't.
in the working of Brussels, but would it be fair to say that you did have an advantage that other small parties might not, in the sense that you had an intensely Eurosceptic press in Britain that was receptive to the message?
You didn't
if
have,
not yet to
in
the
those
party?
days, you didn't have an intensely Eurosceptic press in Britain. The days of Boris Johnson writing absurdities from the Telegraph column had gone, and there were very few. You had The Economist, famously Eurosceptic, the FT, deeply Eurosceptic.
More like the Sun, the Daily Mail.
The Sun didn't have a
the Daily
reporter there,
Express.
the Express didn't have a reporter there, the Mail didn't have a reporter there.
No, but they did talk about Europe, didn't they?
In
This is years
a
after
broad
Russell
brush way,
Roberts.
not in detail,
Yeah.
not in actually what's going on. And your classic attempt to try and do something about a piece of legislation, there would be a sort of European white paper, green paper. You'd make a fuss about it. Oh, no, they don't mean that, don't worry your head. And then it would, and the press wouldn't be interested. It's only a green paper. Why would we be interested in a green paper from Brussels? For goodness sake, do you know how dull that is? And they're deliberately dull. The legislation and the stuff that was created there is opaque and dull and tedious and written by committee, because if it's got to be translated into 27 languages, it has to be really toffee-like to get through. So you had that problem. All the legislation is given the name of the parliamentarian who writes it. It's the Bloggs report, it's the Jones report, it's the Buitenweg report. Again, it divorces the punter. Who the hell's Buitenweg? I don't know. But if it was the your cars must have 3 wheels report, people might notice. But if it's called the Buitenweg, what's that? And so the whole system is designed to obfuscate. So that's one problem. Then no British politician, or national politician elsewhere for that matter, is going to say, vote for me, I can do virtually nothing. And national politicians, it made no sense at all to be honest about the power and the influence of the European Commission, because it would mean that they didn't have it. So you can't see them during election campaigns standing up and saying, it's really worthwhile voting for me, but I can't touch trade, environment, this, that, agriculture, da-da-da-da-da-da. That's one of the reasons why so much of our politics in the UK over this period was all schools and hospitals. Because those are 2 areas that the EU didn't have competence over. They could have some influence of those 2 policies. Everything else, not our problem field. And so there was that problem as well.
So thinking about someone who was making this case, and you mentioned that you were directly recruited over a pint by Nigel Farage, and you came to be seen as perhaps one of the few people he really trusted. How important do you think that he personally was to UKIP's success?
Colossal. Absolutely. I mean, there is no doubt that without him, there was no way we would be where we are.
What was it that made him so important?
Quite early on, he did well, I'll give an example. You'd be sitting there in the pub in Place Luxembourg after a hard day being in the pub in Place Luxembourg, and shock, Newsnight call, opportunity of 3 minutes in Newsnight. He would be on Eurostar, go to London to do the thing, and come back the next morning. He knew the importance of it, and the tiniest thing that was available, he went for it. That takes real commitment, most politicians would sit there and go, 1.5 minutes on Newsnight. I can't, really? You think? He went that extra yard. The other thing, he did a short piece on Today programme. This is probably 2006, 7. And it was from Brussels. There must have been a council meeting or something of that sort. And the editor of the Today programme, whose name escapes me, but the one before Rod Little, turned to me, again, funnily enough, in a pub, and basically said, the thing about your boss, Gawain, he speaks fluent human. And given that politics is a business about trying to present complex ideas in language that ordinary, sensible people can understand, it's phenomenal how few can actually do that. There are very, very few people who have the ability to synthesize complex ideas quickly, effectively. And it got to the point where you talk to various, particularly BBC, but not just BBC, because again, the BBC had to be there. It was never covered in the news, but it was covered on the website and things of this sort. And you'd pick up local radio, local things of this sort. But talking to them, because most of my career was working with him, I thought this was the norm. He's never done 2 takes. Now, you would have thought that would be normal. But virtually every politician you've ever met, oh no, can we do it again? Never. And so he's got a hinterland. He knows a great deal, and he's able to lard his political message with aphorisms and references to things outside that, which again is good. And he's a human. I mean, we all knew he drinks, he smokes, and he shags a bit. He has legs of clay, but he never pretended to be anything other. He never pretended to be the perfect man. He never pretended to be better or more moral or wiser than anybody else. And that, over a period of time, and phenomenal hard work of going to public meetings with 15 people in Cornwall and doing all that stuff. And you should have seen his car when I first started. It was this astonishing brown Volvo with its rust parts held together with UKIP stickers. It should be in the Tate Gallery. It was an extraordinary thing. But he worked his very socks off, and he built up an audience.
And he had 2 spells as leader. He resigned in 2009.
No, he had 5.
5, okay. 2 long ones. So he resigned as leader in 2009 and then came back again in 2010. And when he came back into an environment that must have suddenly looked a lot more favourable to UKIP. In a sense, you'd had the financial crisis, you'd had the expenses scandal, the Lib Dems were imploding in governments, who often took a certain anti-establishment vote. You had a Conservative leader who was taking the Conservative Party in a more liberal direction on certain issues.
Though he had, of course, won his Conservative leadership on the basis of taking the Tories out of the EPP.
Quite. So who was not going to stand up to Euroscepticism in the Conservative Party. Did it change the way you operated?
We rather enjoyed it because he started having a go at us. The famous cranks, gadflies and fruitcakes and nutters and racists mostly and things of this sort. A lot of people thought actually that the racists mostly, it was an insult, but people went, not from our experience of them. It didn't ring true. So there was that. You did have the financial crisis. That obviously caused a great deal of disquiet with the broader political, though I know obviously UKIP itself had its own corruption scandals and its own issues we had to sack. But we acted quite quickly. When we had a dodgy type, we got rid of them. We acted fast, and this was something that was different from our colleagues and our opposition. But there was slowly, the media was very, very slow to catch up. The key moment was when Patrick O'Flynn, who was then the chief political commentator on the Express, convinced Desmond to make the Express a Eurosceptic paper, an explicitly, avowedly withdrawalist newspaper. And that was 10 years ago. So that was 2010. And suddenly, I had journalists phone me up. Having spent 5-6 years on the phones, pushing. Suddenly, something happened, and a journalist would phone me for a comment. It's like, oh, this is how it works with other parties, is it? Journalists come to you and ask you questions. Wow. It's fun.
So you've got a changing media environment. You've also got
Massively.
You've also got, I mean, 2013 and 2014, very good election results.
Councils.
Local elections.
Local council elections.
2014 in the European Parliament.
Well, the 2013 council elections was eye-opening. I think it was that year that Cameron had three-line whipped against a referendum. And this suppurating boil within the Conservative Party, post-Maastricht, post-92, there was it's growing, particularly in the membership, not so much in the management, but in the membership. The FSB did a poll of its members, and it was something like 70% were withdrawalists of the Federation of Small Business. Its management weren't, but the members were. And you started to see that there was this split between, and it became very apparent in 2016, of course, but this split between the ordinary people who were often members of these organisations and the managements of these organisations. There had been a capture, an institutional capture of so many of the institutions that are supposed to represent small battalions. The trade union movement, after Jacques Santer, had switched straight away. They were fierce Eurosceptics, but they'd switched straight away. They supported free movement of people, which to many union members is that, hold on, you're supporting mass competition in my workplace and driving my wages down. Why? I remember somebody, I've forgotten, I think it was YouGov or something, did a survey of Unison's membership. And something like 14% of Union's membership was supporting UKIP at this point. I did write to Unison and asked for 14% of their block grant, but they didn't respond.
You made a capture of your own in 2014, where two Conservative MPs came over to UKIP, Mark Reckless and Douglas Carswell.
Just a quick back to 13. We were winning council wards where the candidate had not put a flyer out, had not even delivered a single leaflet. I remember on the morning after the 2013 council election, this guy phoned me up from Dorset, and he said, Gawain, yes, it's about 7:30 in the morning, bastard. And he said, Gawain, yes, I'm not sure what to do. What do you mean? Well, I just won a council seat last night. Well done. 20 council wards, these are big wards. These are 10 to 20,000 people. These are significant wards. He'd done nothing. He said, well, there's the Bournemouth Evening Echo and the local BBC on my lawn. What do I do? Well, are you going to do the job? Yes. Open the door.
In practical terms, did the press operation expand at that point?
Yes. We started to take on one or two people, interns, and then we started with the position. Because it was 2009 I moved to the UK for the 2009 election, stayed after that point. But 2014, going to that, what you had is a Conservative Party leadership fiercely anti any move towards Euroscepticism. They did the EPP thing. They felt somewhat burnt by it. It was difficult. Cameron was a corporatist, and in those terms, he was much more. He was very much following the Blair line of in the heart of Europe, and they would talk a good fight. I mean, Haig had made an absolute hash of the "Let me give me your country back" election campaign. So the Tory party felt burnt over Euroscepticism. The mood was there. It was transparent from the 2013 council elections, where we picked up 400-500 seats with virtually no campaign, and let's be honest, a local election manifesto that amounted to 5 words on the back of a fag packet. And yet people were voting for us. And a lot of we started to see a lot more attacks, a lot more political attacks on our individuals, and one or two were fair. I remember Hope Not Hate coming up and proving that 4 of our candidates had been BNP members. Sacked them that day. Thank you very much. We didn't have the resources to check. You did it. Great. Get rid of the bastards. However, there was a mood. And in certain parts of the country, and Clacton being a very key place, we started doing polling. There had been independent polling. The I Want a Referendum campaign had been doing little polls around the country. The campaign, and the little groupsicles of Eurosceptic movements were starting to get the campaign for Independent Britain, the Bruges group were publishing things, they were having conferences. There was a mood. There was certainly a mood, and there were backbench Tories who were happy to talk to us in private. And we started doing polls ourselves, and one of the polls, obviously, was Clacton. Now, we presented those polling details to Mr. Carswell, and it basically said, "You'll lose." even Douglas, I'm a Eurosceptic Carswell, under the Tory banner would be beaten by UKIP. It encouraged him to defect. Now, to be fair, I didn't know about this. I found out literally as he walked through the door to the press conference. Gawain, you organise a press conference and get the entire lobby there. When? Tomorrow. Oh, right, okay. So you then start phoning around all the lobby going, yes, it's really important. What is it? Can't tell you. No, but it's really, really important. Trust me, it's important. A good third to a half of them turned up, and a lot turned up 5 minutes later when it went on Twitter, and you had people like David Wooding charging across Parliament Square trying to get to this press conference. But what was really telling about this was that when he walked in the room, even our good friends, the snappers, took a breath in. Normally, something happens, it's clatter, 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 as all the shots are taken off. There was a 1 to 2 second stop, as even the photographers were amazed at what had just happened as he walked in the room. It was a coup de théâtre, and something that Farage is very, very good at is the coup de théâtre.
Did it bring problems with it over the long term, though?
We all know it did, yes, of course it did. But what he did, which was right and proper, and even more so in the case of Mark Reckless, he resigned. He changed party, he resigned and stood again and asked his constituency, the people of his constituency, permission to change party. Now, can you imagine if last year all those chaps who were terribly brave to create the Changed UK, or whatever it was called, if they had done the same? They should have done the same. They really, really should have done that. And that showed a level of honour amongst those two that has not been replicated since. One hoped that would be it would become tradition to do so. But no, it wasn't tradition. But I mean, in the case of Carswell, that was our number 1 target seat. Great. The case of Reckless, it was our 245th target seat. We didn't think we were going to win that in a by-election. Or 245th, 235th, something like that. And so for him to resign and threaten his entire career, that took serious moral courage. And it is no surprise that he's a Brexit Party member of the Welsh Assembly still. Whereas Douglas and Nigel probably don't get on very well. Reckless, who was part of the same Hannon-Carswell group, he behaved with a lot more dignity and honour.
Let's fast forward to 2016 and to the referendum. Yep. UKIP didn't get the nomination as the official Leave campaign vehicle.
Leave.eu, yeah.
Was that
we were never going to. Of course, it was disappointing, but we were never going to. Because Elcom...
Right. Why were relations so bad with the official Leave campaign, Vote Leave? Including, of course, Mr. Cummings.
The Conservative Party, which was Vote Leave, I'm trying to think. Basically, we're below the salt. We are below the salt. Not the sort of people we want to see. Really, bit common. The Leave.eu campaign was just a bit common. They talked about things like immigration. And if the Vote Leave campaign initially, one of their first 5 adverts was, Brexit's great for engineering. Yeah, that's going to go down well in Burnley. It's great for universities. Really? Do you actually want to win this campaign? And there was also, we knew we were going to have the separate campaigns, and talking to Vote Leave people, they wanted to wait until Cameron had got back from Brussels with his negotiations, which would have left something like 2 months to set up a campaign. And this was ridiculous. What were they doing? Cameron was never going to come back with anything. It was transparently obvious he was going to fail to get anything from them. So we started our campaigning hard in October. We had tried to do some things together, for example, over the wording of the question, for example, of the franchise of the question, and Cummings had shot down any workings together. But this was back in, as I said, October, November. So, as it happened, and we were pretty sanguine about this. Yes, it would be nice. It'd be nice, but it wasn't going to happen. We were sanguine because what it meant was there were 2 campaigns. Nigel might not go down well in Surrey, whereas Michael Gove would. But sending Gove to Sunderland, I know people would quite like to send Gove to Sunderland and Coventry, but the bottom line is, you was horses for courses. You had two separate campaigns, one talking about rarefied stuff about trade details and all the rest of it, which, guess, goes down in London, goes down in Surrey, and you've got to remember, though London voted Remain, a significant proportion of Londoners voted Leave. I mean, it wasn't just that. There was a significant middle-class vote for Leave that people have seemed to have brushed over quite badly. Whereas Nigel, you can take him into a working man's club in Doncaster, and they might not vote for him, but they're bloody pleased to see him, because to him, he's a real person.
The campaign itself was quite gloves off on all sides.
Yeah.
In retrospect, is there anything that you regret from the campaign?
Personally?
Well, in terms of the way that the campaign was fought, atmosphere of the campaign, or some of the claims made.
I mean,
Turkey is joining the EU.
Well, it was quite amusing to see the Vote Leave crowd in the last 2 weeks starting to talk about immigration, starting to talk about... In fact, they went way further than we would have done. It's a little bit, going back a bit, do you remember the racist poster vans?
Yes.
The Home Office's racist poster vans, which were designed specifically to target the UKIP vote. I think it took a quarter of an hour when we found out about it for Farage to denounce them, because that's not what we were about. We're firmly against having publicans and landlords and shopkeepers and all the rest of it becoming part of the state apparat. If you've got a border, you have a border guard. That's where the issue is. You can't ask every single employer in this country or landlord in this country to become an unpaid border patrol officer. That is wrong. And if you're going to, give them a uniform and pay them.
But there were some very controversial claims.
There were.
For example, the HIV health tourism.
That was during the election. That was during the election, and no, I'd have gone with TB.
In fact, Turkey is joining the EU, the breaking point poster.
At that point, you've got to remember that Cameron had been to Ankara and said, I'm campaigning for you to come into the EU. So there was some, and Turkey has been an applicant nation for many, many years. So there was some truth in that one. The 350 was nothing to do with us, and from what I can understand, was nothing to do with Boris either. He was presented it as a fait accompli, and it was done. But the breaking point poster, it's not the poster I would have led that final campaign with. Certainly. What I found was very interesting, though, on that day, the breaking point poster was also full-page adverts in 4 newspapers, I think it was 4, but it had much more text, and thus context. Not a single complaint in the morning after the papers came published, not one. However, at 11 o'clock, Joe Cox was murdered, and everything changed. And so, as I say, in the morning, no problem at all. But when the news came through about the murder of Joe Cox, everything changed. And the suggestions were this was a poster, what was it, Hitler had used this, or the Nazis had used exactly the same photograph. And this was a photograph that we nicked, we paid for, but we nicked from the front page of The Guardian. That's where we'd seen it. So the idea that the only people who are actually focused on Nazi advertising are left-wingers. We didn't have a clue.
If you had been advising the other side of the campaign,
Yep.
as a PR professional, if you had been hired by the Remain campaign, what would you have advised them to do differently?
A sense of humour would be a good start. And how about a positive vision? Europe's wonderful, rather than it won't be as bad as all that, or Europe's okay. But they were so miserable, and so downbeat, and so Project Fear, and so everything's dreadful. There was no positive vision of the UK's membership of the European Union. And they're still having problems with it. It was something that the pro-campaign, the in-campaign, the Remain campaign, the Revoke campaign, call it what you will campaign, did pick up after the referendum, is they stopped being embarrassed about the flag. The referendum campaign, the Remain campaign, didn't use the EU flag at all. And that's probably a good reason. And actually the poster I wanted was a very simple one with an EU flag and a Union Jack saying, which is yours? And that was, I thought, a very powerful image. But the Remain campaign did not use the the EU flag. So they had very little to get onto. There was no, it was downright miserable, downbeat, a little bit squabbly, but no more. Our side was far more squabbly and much more high tempo squabbly. I probably wouldn't, if I'd been Bob Geldof, I probably wouldn't have hired that boat. Probably not. That was brilliant. Best day of campaigning of my life. It's absolutely nuts. Charging down the Thames, having Bob Geldof bellow at us. Superb. And of course, you had a multi-millionaire liberal chap doing this to hard-working fishermen. It was the perfect message. We expected that event, that little stunt. We expected that stunt to hit page 24 in a photograph. It was front-page news around the world because of the behaviour of the other side.
And that comparison that you've drawn there between the multi-millionaire and the hard-working fisherman, that seems to be a comparison that ran quite a long way through the Leave campaign.
Absolutely. And they did it for us. Right. They did it for us. It was brilliant. Thank you. Made our job easier.
I suppose I wanted to ask you as a kind of public relations professional about the salience of this idea of the elite in British politics. And you tweet quite a lot about the elite. There are a variety of elites. I'm actually quite in favour of certain, at least academic and economic elites. I think it's a good thing. We need them. However, what we were talking about is a Whitehall business media thing. Gove would call it a blob. Cummings would call it a blob. That was very hard. It's everywhere. I think the Mary Beard appointment is part of the same thing. So what we're talking about is a second-rate establishment that control across the board. It's the people who get their jobs in the Guardian media pages. It is that sort of thing. And one can go into all sorts of sort of seminar room discussions and discursiveness about what that is comprised of, but they are more like their colleagues in the European Parliament than they are the blokes down the pub 100 yards from their office. Isn't there a counter-argument to that, though, that would say, look at who supported Brexit in 2016. You've got the world's most powerful media magnate, Rupert Murdoch. You've got the owners of the Daily Telegraph.
Well, he always supports what he thinks is going to win.
Okay.
He always supports what he's going to think he's going to win. I don't think he's particularly ideological.
Right.
He just wants to sell papers.
Broadly backed Brexit.
Yeah, they did.
Not all of them.
The
Daily Telegraph, the Daily Mail, the Daily Express.
It's a lot of hard work getting there.
Donald Trump.
I'm not sure if Donald Trump supporting it is particularly helpful in this country.
Perhaps not, but I'm making a point about the elite. If we think about Boris Johnson, Jacob Rees-Mogg, Nigel Farage was at Dulwich College.
Yes, but you've got an interesting idea
of what is an elite if they are not part of it?
They are, and it's always been, Nigel Farage shouldn't be successful. He's a public school boy, he was a city trader, and 20 years in the European Parliament. He shouldn't get on he shouldn't be able to go into a Featherstone working man's club where 90% of the people in the room have lost their job under Thatcher, and there's Farage was a picture with Margaret Thatcher mug. And yet, they are far happier to speak to him than they are to Ed Miliband.
I'm not suggesting he shouldn't be able to do it. I'm just wondering
but the point is that he cuts through. He cuts through. And the point is, and I think that was always the case, you will always have anti-establishment people who come from the elite. I don't think, just because Farage was those things, and he was, that he is part of the establishment. No, he really pisses off the establishment. The establishment really don't like him at all. If he was part of the establishment, trust me, he would have been given a peerage in 2016. UKIP has not received, well, actually, that's not lie, one person received an OBE once. Nothing. You've got...
Would you take an OBE? Right, okay. I want to hand over to the audience in a moment. So can I just ask you...
Nigel wouldn't, by the way.
Sorry?
Nigel wouldn't.
He wouldn't?
No, not now.
Interesting.
He probably would have done in 2016, but not since.
Okay. Just a final question about the period after the referendum. Obviously, you then...
went off and did my own stuff.
Party. Has the Conservative Party now made the Brexit Party redundant? Is it essentially not
I think more to the point, the Brexit Party made the Brexit Party redundant. in honesty,
by impact
by-
in 2019?
by flashing through the sky like a meteor in the beginning of the year with the European elections, beating Labour and Conservatives combined after a 6 weeks campaign, by forcing May to resign, by forcing the leadership election in the Tory party, where somebody who had been a Leaver, they had to have a Leaver as leader, by changing the Tory party significantly, by making the Tory party actually listen to its members rather than some of its more larger corporate friends and its larger donors. There is much more to do. Brexit is the start of a rolling campaign to improve politics in this country. But without Brexit, you won't be able to do that. And so we did our famous stand down halfway through the general election campaign. That wasn't easy. There were decent people who felt absolutely betrayed by doing so. However, the idea of having Jeremy Corbyn as Prime Minister was just too much. And not just because the Labour Party is largely, at least the parliamentary Labour Party is a Remain party, for all sorts of reasons. I think that's stuck in the craw. So we had to do that. But over the years, we don't expect thanks. When we look at what's happening now in the government, you've got, on Brexit, the rhetoric is actually very, very good. I think most people who are involved in the Brexit Party will agree that the rhetoric that Boris is presenting and Frost is doing and the various others are doing, the rhetoric is excellent. We'll see about delivery, but he's marched so far up the hill that I'm not sure he can march too far down without it causing immense trouble. The trouble at mill will be colossal. Brexit aside, the political agenda of this Conservative Party, I think to most people who took part in the Brexit Party, were involved, have qualms. The suggestions in Sunak's budget that he's going to double tax on entrepreneurship fills us with horror. Some of the advice to hospitals that they don't have to treat somebody who says something that the nurse or doctor feels may be a non-crime hate incident. This is deeply concerning. So whilst on the Brexit side, I think the Brexit Party people broadly, and of course you're talking from Claire Fox to Anne Widdecombe, this is quite a broad spectrum of people. But we came together over Brexit, we came together over democracy, we came together about listening to those 17.4 million and rejecting the way that the establishment had captured government, captured the negotiations. It was stopping it. There was no doubt in November of 18, when we first started really talking about creating something, there's no doubt at that point that we knew we weren't going to leave in March 29th, as we promised. We saw the withdrawal agreement as it came forward. It was diabolical. The deal, it was transparent that the government had been captured by people who saw Brexit as a disaster to be mitigated rather than an opportunity to be grasped. And therefore, it was going to run into the sand by not starting the process instantly after the referendum, by not doing what he'd promised. I'm going to do it, and I'm going to do it instantly. No, what he did instantly was resign, leaving the Tory party leaderless for a while. Yes, Cameron. Yeah. But he always said during the referendum campaign, if the country votes that way, then I'll get on with it and do it. And he didn't. And he dropped out. He gave space for the Gina Millers and the court cases and all the rest of it. He gave huge energy and oxygen to those who wished to overturn that vote. And so we had to act. And by acting, we changed the world.
Okay, well, on that note, let's open it up to the audience. I'm going to take bunches of questions, so we've got some rolling... Okay, if you could wave your arm. We've got some roving microphones, so when I point to you, if you could wait till the microphone gets to you. Yes, we'll take one here, please.
What was your personal experience of working with Dominic Cummings, and how do you think your experience of him measures up to the portrayal of him in the media?
Thanks. If we could take a couple, that'd be good. So yes, please, just behind.
Hello. From last year, I understand the Brexit Party are going to pivot to become the Reform Party, and one of Farage's stated goals is to get rid of the first past the post system. How is he going to do this with no apparent widespread appetite for change and the fact that the party voted to keep the system in the 2011 AV referendum?
Okay, and one more. We're here for a moment of exhausted questions, so while you're warming up your batteries, if we just take those two.
Dominic Cummings, quite literally, my experience of working with Dominic Cummings amounts to 2 emails. I don't have experience of working with Dominic Cummings. He was not particularly forthcoming. He decided we were ghastly. He wanted to destroy us. We only got it second hand. I don't know. He is who he is. But I can't eliminate it because literally 2 emails, that's it.
Why did he want to destroy you?
Because we were a threat to the Tory party, we were a threat to his agenda, we were a threat to the way he felt things should be. From talking to a collection of people, that Benedict Cumberbatch programme was psychologically accurate about him. Pretty much everybody else was deeply inaccurate, and I know a lot of them. But from what I understand, it was like you've got the blur function on your phone. Accurate in that centre bit, but everything else is very blurred. But I can only talk through third hand. I don't have that personal experience. And in the Reform Party business, honestly, I was made redundant in December after the referendum, after the election. I haven't the first idea. I think there's a great deal of appetite for some change. I think that the AV referendum was not a referendum on PR. You've got to remember the polls changed very rapidly in that because the same people who were defending AV were the same idiots who ran the Remain campaign, who has no ability. I remember we had offered 8, 9 times to take part and help. And then I think a week and a half before the referendum, the Yes to PR campaign got in touch. Oh, can Nigel do this? Can Nigel do... And when they did their wash-up afterwards, they admitted that not engaging a speaker and a figure who appealed to the Tories was a slight mistake. So I think it's a big push. What you'll see is what you are seeing now from people who are former Brexit Party or Brexit Party people. There's a range of things going on. There was a conference last weekend in Stockport organised by Claire Fox with a lot of people involved in that, thinking of ways to go forward, the Stockport Declaration that came out of it. There are things happening, but whether they happen under the auspices of the Brexit Party or the Reform Party or the I Want a Gin and Tonic Party, I do not know.
Okay, let's take some more questions, please. Yes, gentleman over here, and then Morgan.
Gawain, did you make any friends when you were in Brussels that you've still got? And generally, what were the people like there in the institutions that you had to deal with?
Thank you, and then just back a couple of rows.
So one of the things that people talk about in British politics after 2016 is that basically left right is gone, it's just leave remain, and that's the kind of central axis. I'm not saying it's true, but it is a term. Do you think that this, if you had been the Labour Party at this last election, how would you have negotiated that terrain?
Yes, gentleman over there.
Oh, bugger. Benabib.
Gawain, there have been many ups and downs over the last 20 years, I'm sure, in the fight for Brexit. When would you say you were your most despondent in the last 20 years, and when were you happiest?
Okay, first one, friends in Brussels, lots. Lots and lots. Like most people, Eurocrats are quite nice people. And also, if you're going to be a Eurosceptic in a place like Brussels, if you can't make friends with people who disagree with you, you're in real trouble. Basically, so no, almost inevitably, my issues with political individuals who believe differently to me are here, not there. The people in Brussels were far more honest about what they were trying to do, what they were trying to achieve, far more open, and frankly, I don't like to drink alone. So, you have to get on with people who disagree with you, don't you? And I maintain a fair few decent friendships. I was out last week, not far from here, in a pub around the corner from here, with the former head of the European Young Federalists League. You get on with people, don't you? And people are people, people are decent wherever you find them, unless proven otherwise. How should the Labour Party dealt with it? They're not even getting there now, are they? They basically, if the Labour Party had looked beyond the sort of academic, university-educated, too many people in the Labour Party have contempt, and they do have contempt, for views that were normal in the Labour Party until the 1980s. 1990s, they left behind the people who they were founded to talk to. I have not seen, Labour won in the valleys, but during that general election, I have not seen such hatred for the current Labour Party and the current Labour leadership than I did from people in the Welsh valleys. It was visceral. Now, I think the one thing that Labour really needs to get its head around is don't look like you don't like the country. That would be a really good start, because the vast majority of Labour supporters up and down this country quite like this country. And they don't like a Labour Party that sits there and says that this country is shocking, this country is awful, it's a windswept, soggy cake of a country. Stop disliking the people who you want to vote for you. It would be my basic answer. And they do. You've got a Labour leadership campaign. You probably don't, but there was a Tory leadership campaign with Michael Portillo, the darling of the right. He was up for their leadership. And he seemed to run his campaign on a combination of gay rights and legalising cannabis. Now, I agree with both of these. However, you're not going to win a Tory leadership with a Tory membership on a campaign of legalising cannabis and gay rights. And this was before paragraph 16 of section 28. It was that period, so it was quite brave. You've now got a Labour leadership campaign that, to all intents and purposes, and how it's being reported and how you can see it out there, is about transsexual rights. Now, of course transsexuals should have rights, but can we stop having the entire political debate in the Labour Party about a group of people that amount to, what, less than 0.5% in the country? It's crackers, and it is seen to be crackers. And so they've got to sort of get their heads out of somebody else's arse and look around at the world as it is, rather than how they'd like it to be. I know it's rude, but I'm sitting there baffled, utterly baffled by what they're up to. It seems crackers. Worst time. Just after the Dutch referendum, and I'm in the European Parliament, and the Dutch constitutional referendum had won 60-40, I think, against the European Constitution, and following the French, that was a death knell to the European Constitution. We were ecstatic. That afternoon, Blair said that we weren't going to have the referendum he promised us on it, because the French and Dutch had killed it, so we didn't. So we had this opportunity to say our piece on the Constitution years before 16, and that was killed. And then a guy called Joe Leinen, who was, there's a guy called, he's a German PSC, socialist MEP, very, very important. He was the chairman of the Constitutional Affairs Committee in the European Parliament. He'd written the legislation that created the Constitution in the European Parliament, along with a Labour member. And Joe turned to me and to Farage. We were having our celebratory bottle of good French fizz, actually. And he said, you may have your victory today, but we have 1,000 ways to win. And that rather took the shine off that day's celebrations. And looking at what they did to the Dutch and the French referendum results, we just took out one word from the, and then we took out one word from the preamble of the Constitution, and the Dutch didn't get a second referendum, did they? They were just soon rolled in, despite the fact they said no. So that there was a great deal of truth in what Joe Linen said. Best time was probably around about 4 o'clock on the 26th of June, when we'd finally won that vote. Now, of course, so between then and now, there's been plenty of miserable times. However, that was something else. It was I came out of Millbank Tower, and it was dawn. And quite literally, a new dawn was breaking. It was a beautiful morning. The sky was that pale orangey, pinky blue coming up over Westminster. Before that was scaffolding over Big Ben. And I drank that in.
One very quick final round of questions. Gentleman at the back, and then lady here.
Hi, Gawain. I'm taking a quote out of some sayings, The Art of War, 3,000-year-old text. Know thy enemy. We don't consider you to be our enemy, but definitely they're on the other side of the negotiating table, and we would like to know our opponent. They're going through quite a bit at the moment, disagreeing over how to fill the gap in their budget. Massive growing Eurosceptic reporters within Europe. How would you advise or predict the European Union shape over the coming 5 years? What would it look like? What do we expect? Because we're going to have to negotiate with that shape, or they're going to change, basically, into what?
Thank you. And we've got another question just down here in the middle.
So a couple questions. I'm half French, half British, and as a result of the campaign during the referendum, I felt like I was kind of getting kicked out, especially after the result came through, and that was intensified by the fact that I've been yelled at for being French in pubs and stuff since. So I was genuinely up the road from here. Because I told them, and then they yelled at me. Well, I didn't think I was going to get yelled at.
Come on, allow the question.
Yeah.
And more lightheartedly, with a success in Britain, do you think other countries will leave the EU, and if so, which ones?
Thank you. We'll just take those two.
Okay. Right, the first one, know thy enemy. One, they're being absolutely transparent about what they want. Again, I revert to what I said earlier. If you want to find obfuscation, if you want to find shadows, if you want to find lies about our relationship with Europe, look in Whitehall, look in amongst the British politicians. The chaps on the continent, our friends on the continent, have always been absolutely clear about what they're after. It's not that hard to work out what they want. And one thing, after the constitutional referenda, there was no plan B in Brussels. But what one must never underestimate, despite these troubles with the Visegrad group wanting more money, the Dutch saying over my dead body, the Finns doing this and God knows what else, and everybody going, cash. Never ever underestimate the sheer political will that the EU has. I remember after the constitutional referendum talking to Margot Wallström, who was then the Commissioner for Information, Propaganda. She introduced herself to the Propaganda Commission, so we have to take it as such. And she's now the Swedish Foreign Minister, I think. And her basically saying, but what you have to understand is, I have invested so much of my political life in this, I cannot let it fail. Don't underestimate that. You may see there are ructions now. It may wobble. There may be these arguments, absolutely, and you may have particularly east and north. I mean, there's a split east-west, and there's also a split north-south, and the Greeks are creaking still, and so on and so forth. But never underestimate the sheer political, intellectual and moral will of the centre to carry on as it is and carry on going the way it's going. Enlargement will continue. They will make up for us with countries like Montenegro, which of course will pay them £39 billion a year. But the point is they will continue. Don't expect it to crumble. You might want it to, you might not, but don't expect it to. And actually, if it does, depending how, it could be an absolute disaster for us because we trade with our friends on the continent and they trade with us. And so whilst I wouldn't want to be a Dane and I wouldn't want to be a Finn, I'm perfectly happy being what I am and who I am, I don't wish them ill. I think if there is another big wobble, a 2008 style wobble, over maybe the multi-financial framework or multi-year financial framework or something of this sort, where they realise that the demands and wishes, the promises made to the A8 enlargement countries of ever increasing largesse over the years have to come across the practical reality, economic reality, that they can't. And there will be breaks and cracks. But as I say, I think it's highly unlikely, unless something really big happens, that it changes very much. And I'm very sorry to hear that. And I'm rude about the French constantly, but I don't mean it. But I mean, in that knockabout, my father lives in the part of Calais, so I spent a lot of time over there over the years. So I'm quite a fan of the place. But I think that, and I'm very sad that happened. But as I say, we've been rude about the French for about 400 years, 500 years, so I don't think it's that, not just about Brexit. However, will there other countries go? That depends. It has been absolutely clear from day one, and again, as I say, our friends on the continent are quite clear about their objectives and all the rest of it. They've been saying it for years. The key strategic objective of the European Union's negotiations with the UK is the UK must fail. The last thing they would like to see is Britain succeed and the UK succeed, because if we succeed, there is a massive existential threat that some of the countries that currently pay into the budget and are starting to get a bit about it, there is this threat that, say, Denmark or a country like that might go, well, you know what? They're doing all right. Why are we taking all this rubbish from Brussels and then cleaning us out of cash when leaving seems to be okay? So it is possible, but that actually does, and as we know, if you look at the polling, though a Eurobarometer is never something to look at if you want to, the week after the Dutch voted against the Constitution, Eurobarometer came out and informed us that the Dutch were going to vote in favour of the Constitution by I think 2 to 1. And if that's where the European Union are getting their intelligence from, their strategic intelligence from, that might explain a great deal. But it is clear that post the referendum in 2016, with the chaos that took place here, the complete lack of leadership, the complete lack of direction, I disagree with your point that Euroscepticism is rising in Europe. It isn't. You've seen actually a diminution of Euroscepticism in Europe, not in every country, but mostly, largely because we've not been a very good example. If we become a good example, then I think there's a possibility. But right now, no.
Right, I know there have been lots of other hands up, but I think we're standing between you and the drinks reception, and Gawain's glass is running dangerously low. Please to sign up to the MBI, and thank you for giving us a
Thank you. I hope that was that all right?